Do you like the Zoom AI there? You did the thumbs up and it did the bubble for you,
Did
Amy?
it really? I hate that thing.
Yes.
Uh, I always forget about it and it happens and sometimes you're just like making hand motions in the middle of a meeting and all of a sudden something will pop out of your head and it distracts the whole audience. And like, I don't get it.
Yeah. Well,
I wish you could turn, maybe there's a way that you can turn it off. Google Meet does the same thing now.
wow. Oh, well. Well, I'm going to share my whole screen, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because I have a few things a few things I want to share. It's pretty much, Amy, thanks for joining me. I didn't know I'd have you today,
Yeah.
but pretty much the Andrew and Amy show, and we need you all to engage to make today interesting. I definitely brought I think, some really interesting stuff, some cool stuff. Corey, I might ask you to chime in based on your experience here, because it really, the end result is I brought a tabletop around phishing, ATO, and I can leave everybody with a business email compromise tabletop. But before I get into that and kind of what I brought to the table, again, welcome everybody. Happy 2024. I hope everybody's awesome. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces. And I wanted to just start off with anything on your mind based on the previous session. Now that we do have Amy here and that you might have like came here today to go, I really wanted to make sure we came back to this subject that we can, jot down and come back next week when Chip and Jim and team are all with us. But it sounds like there was a spirit or a very good conversation around App Wizard. So starting there, but anybody have anything in that area? Has anybody started like engaging with the team with their recommendation in App Wizard? I'm just curious.
I think that's what part of the conversation was last week, was showing some of the like the list of what had come in and the quantity of requests and showing what the current stack ranking looks like based on that.
Got it. Was QuickBooks still number one, Amy, in that category?
No.
No, it wasn't. What was it, Corey? I see you shaking your head.
Wasn't it Autotask or something like that?
Auto task.
Yeah.
Huh, interesting.
I think I think there's ThreatLocker was number 3, and I mentioned I didn't think that ThreatLocker has the API capabilities to feed their logs anywhere. At least last I checked with them, they didn't.
And was Hoodoo up there as well? Was that the other one in the top 3?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
I do recall that Okta was on the list, but not officially listed on the list. Essentially, that's kind of like that's the biggest one for us, and
Yeah.
what I've engaged with your guys' team for
Yeah,
both
maybe this
to
wasn't on the
monitor
list
out.
'cause it's in
Like
progress.
there's two pieces to the Okta piece for us. Is we want to be able to use it as the identity provider to log into the service, but we also want to be able to monitor Okta from a log source and security perspective.
Mhm.
I think we came into the consensus that the list more than likely was based off of tools, applications, whatever you want to call it, that MSPs are using. So it wasn't based off a desire of, hey, it'd be amazing if I had visibility into this. It was, hey, I use this the most, so let's add this to the list, I think.
Got it. Got it,
But
Corey.
I saw Adigi on there. Adigi is something I submitted just to get higher visibility, because that's the number one thing I got from our partners as well.
This is
I
interesting.
think that was in the top 4.
Interesting. Hey, Ryan, can I just ask you a question about Okta? Any like fallout from customers, or they're just,
So we don't resell Okta, and we
right.
don't do anything inside our clients' environments from Okta. We use Okta for our as an identity provider for us as an MSP. We have not had any fallout or any issues with how we've been fortunate that we've kind of staggered how we use Okta and knew that there were some risks around it, and so we kind of threaded the needle there, where we didn't have any issues.
Wow.
But
That's pretty
but
awesome.
with that being said, I'm trying to bolster it to make it so that it stays that way. And hopefully using this platform to do so.
Very cool.
So-
Andy, good. Oh, go. Who's going to say something before we go to Andy?
Oh, I was just gonna mention, going back to the auto task, we integrated just recently, Kaseya One turned on the option to integrate a third-party IDP, so we integrated our Azure or Microsoft Entra ID to it, and so we're authenticating through it, and then turn, obviously, SaaS alerts. Now we have visibility into the Kaseya One logins via the Azure or Entra ID.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing, Enrique. Andy, good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We missed you last week. And what came up for me just as I was coming into this, and I apologize for being late, is how about a mapping of respond, fortify, and alerts to right of boom and fill to the mapping of I'm blanking on that.
Cyber
The-
defense matrix.
Yes, exactly. And say what came up for me was we have procedures now in Respond that address certain issues, and how that would be a wonderful, in my view, a potential selling opportunity, to clarify the value proposition of SaaS alerts, as these are the squares that are being addressed. And when you bring this in with Unify, these are the squares that we address. And when you bring in Fortify, these are the squares we're addressing.
Are you familiar with that matrix, Amy, from a marketing side? No? Here, I'll put it in here for you. I'll show you real quick.
First off, how does that sit with you guys? Is this like, am I off base here, or is this?
Let's hear from your peers. I'm
Yeah.
just going to bring this up for Amy. Do you all guys all know about the cyber defense matrix? Or people, do you not? And do you want me to just give, for those that don't, a quick overview? Anybody not, let's see, any knows?
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so real quick, so the author is a gentleman named Sunil Yu. He's considered one of the futurists in cybersecurity. He was the former chief data scientist, security scientist, and held various high-ranking positions in security at the Bank of America. He's been the keynote speaker at Right Up Boom. He's often a very, he's a keynote speaker or definitely a speaker at at RSA, Black Hat, et cetera. And he developed the cyber defense matrix, which if you take a look at, it's basically the functions, the NIST functions across the top and assets going down the side. So he talks about it's like, what do we do in cybersecurity and what do we care about? And the reason he created it, because when he was at Bank of America, one of his remits was Bank of America invested in a lot of cybersecurity companies. So any cybersecurity company that, raised their hand, and he jokes around that they were the no vendor left behind. So every vendor they bought, but he, how to cut through all the marketing jargon to understand what the product did at a primary level. And therefore, he created this matrix. Now, since then, the matrix, he's written a whole book on it because there's been so many different use cases around how the matrix can be used. So let me pause there. Basically, if you think about, like, at a very easy level, I'll leave you guys with this, and then we can talk about what Andy's saying. So if you wanted to, hire, Corey, I'll bring you in. If you were going to hire,
Solutions granted, Sonic Wall, you name it.
solutions granted, they would be able to fill in a lot of this grid. So Corey would say, well, yeah, in terms of Sonic Wall, we're protecting networks. We're, in our SOC, we're doing detection around, probably across the board here. So does that make sense? You're playing bingo based on the stack that you have, and then you within your stack.
There you go. Yeah. You were paused for a second, but yeah.
And is the matrix, the purpose of it just to identify, or does it take you some type of resolution or progression?
Well, the intent of the matrix is to, number one, to understand where your tools fit. And the other thing is, after you place your tools, some very interesting things happen below, Enrique, around something called the degrees of dependency. And what that is as you move from left to right, the people versus the technology portion change dramatically. And if you think about the terms right and left of boom, boom happens at detection, right? If this is all the prevention, right? Left of boom. When detection goes off, that means a boom has occurred. And as we slide to the right of boom, we get into our detect, respond, recover. Well, if you look at degrees of dependency, it becomes much more people-centric and much more expensive. So one of the really cool ways I've seen this used, by the way, as an MSP, which Andy, you know, if you were going to use this in a selling motion, which we're going to get into today with a tabletop, is I think it's really interesting to add maybe another layer here around cost.
Yes, exactly
Right.
right.
Right. Because as I shift to the right, like
It
relative
gets
to,
more
right?
expensive.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. Because if you're talking to your customer, right, and say, hey, look, the right security for us to put in place, if we're doing, you know, from right of boom to the left, it's $5,000 a month. And the customer's like, oh my God, that's so expensive. Well, take them now, say, I understand your perspective, but let's shift and talk about what happens if there's an incident. Let's talk about the cost if we don't do these things. So
Or
they
when
can,
it happens,
yeah.
right?
Basically,
Just
way cheaper to spend on the left than spending on the right.
Oh, it's not even close. And it doesn't take into account, like you could add a whole nother
The
layer
damage,
around reputation,
Mhm.
business loss,
the
right?
cost of the
So
you,
damage.
Andrew, we could take this and take technology out and put cloud security and put for red, you could put coins as an example, right? And for the right, and you say no downtime. And then for the people, you take that people out and you put reputation, dollar signs, and whatever else. And now this is and still processes and governed. And then you begin to map out where this all fits.
well, you're right. I mean, you know, that again, that's we always have
Yep.
to put this in the
Yep.
reference that our customers can understand.
Yep.
Our customers understand money, right?
Yep.
At the end of the day. Corey, I'm curious, have you guys ever used the matrix at all in presentations or conversations?
No, not this one. No. I
Are
may
you
start.
familiar at all with Sunil's stuff?
I am familiar with it. Just we haven't implemented or cross-checked our offerings across of it. You know, we did do the CIS and looked at our offerings and say, okay, we mapped them on there to say, okay, what from our current offerings, what matches up in here, but
Okay.
we haven't
By the
matched
way,
this
it's
one.
interesting. Do you guys mind me showing one of them? Is this interesting to you all? I don't want to, you
To
know,
me, it is, but I'm a newbie, so
um, I just want to show you guys something really interesting.
So
But
Jeremy, while you're pulling that up, Jeremy made some comments here. Legacy
you-
speaking, 75% of security budget was spent on the left side prevention. Um, Meanwhile, dwell time was still over 6 months. I don't understand the term dwell time.
yeah, so dwell time is when, you know, the threat actors in the environment, Amy.
Oh, okay, I haven't heard that term before. Okay. Dwell
That's
time was
okay.
still over 6 months. Now with ransomware taking only 8 hours to launch from start of attack, more budget has been spent on right detection response. Love the TCO approach of the hidden cost of it. An end customer decides to take on additional risk by not implementing your solutions.
Sorry, guys, this used to be so much. I don't like
So there's a lot to be
controls.
said about how to frame this in a way that the customer might be able to better relate to how this is overall um, changing a paradigm about what's required to do some of this, to actually be detect and respond and configuration.
Andy, I think a lot of that probably depends on specifically who you're talking to, right? Are you talking to a
I'm talking about
CISO?
IT direct, yeah, an IT director type level person.
Yeah, then definitely more around the security frameworks and things of that nature. I've seen some of my MSP partners that are speaking to more of the CEO, CRO, kind of stay away from cybersecurity terminology
Okay.
and talk about cyber resilience and protecting their digital assets. So
Yeah, so I totally agree, but you could target based on the ICP, right?
Mhm.
You could customize this look, but it would be the same similar matrix because you could talk about it from loss of access to data, critical data, loss to service delivery. Could be any number of things.
Good, really good stuff. I don't believe it or not, CIS.
Used
I
to be
didn't.
easier.
It used to be. Have you guys ever seen the original Controls Navigator? It
No.
was so much better. I'm gonna have to give Phyllis a lot of grief, but the reason I was hoping to show this to you is CIS also mapped the cyber defense matrix into the Controls Navigator. So, in other words, what are we talking about? Are we talking about data, and are we talking about, so they mapped Sunil's work into the Controls Navigator, but they may have taken it out. So I'll come back to you all.
So Andrew, what brought this up for me was reviewing the templates in Respond and kind of going,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, these start to fill in squares.
Yeah, it's a great piece. Amy, I think there's some, a lot of the MSPs do know the cyber defense matrix now, so it is
Okay.
something. I think it's a good idea from Andy, by the way.
Yeah, I
So,
like it.
okay, sorry, did you grab that one from Jeremy already?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thanks for chiming in. So, I'm gonna pull up back to my PowerPoint, and I wanted to show you guys some trends. Interesting. This comes before we get into the tabletop. And again, Corey, I'm going to lean, if I could lean on you a little here, bud. And if you're busy, just tell me to, stop asking you questions. But this comes from, Chris Lander at Solace. Do you know of Chris at all? They're fairly, they're an IR forensic firm. They got purchased a few years ago by CFC, which is a syndicate of Lloyd's. So they're Lloyd's incident response firm. They go by CFC response when it's a CFC incident, and then they go by Solace if it happens to be a non-CFC. You would just hire them, if you will. Not to the extent of a size of a Kroll or anything like that, but a decent size IR firm. And in talking to Chris, I said, hey, I'm going to do it, walk everybody through a tabletop today. Give me a sense of the trends and ATO stuff you're seeing these days. And it was interesting what their team is getting called into. And I didn't know if you had seen any of this kind of stuff on your side. They started off by talking about an increase in QR codes as a second factor, where you log in with your creds, you're presented with some type of um, branded, right? Oh, we need a second factor, and it's a QR code, and scanning that QR code, obviously, it's taking you to, in essence, a man in the middle site. Have you guys? But that's an interesting newer one that they're starting to see more of. Was curious if you or anybody on the call, but starting with you, Corey, have you seen any more of that recently?
Nothing reported. No, not that we've actually seen on our side. I'm still seeing a lot of you see it there, leveraging SharePoint links, OneDrive links. Those are still happening because those are easy to get around your email security. We're no longer seeing the typical, phishing emails of 2-3 years ago. They're typically having links to legitimate sites that you wouldn't normally block, like I said, like OneDrive or OneNote has been a big one for us. and then inside of there is a link, and then the end user clicks on the link in there. You know, we've seen it in our personal emails, but in the corporate environment, we're also seeing the typical human factor behind it of, hey, call this number, right?
Yeah.
This is happening, call this number, and then they call, and that's where the adversary tries to get them, is over the phone, because people's defensives go down over the phone. You know, obviously the QR code dilemma has been around, and it's easy to trick someone using QR codes. We never really seen a legitimate uptick in people falling for them, at least on our side.
Got it. Good. Very cool.
A couple of comments from Rich and Chad in the chat.
Please, Amy. What do we got?
Rich says important emails going out to set up MFA are using the QR code hack.
So you are seeing it, Rich, a little bit. If he has, I don't know if he has
I don't see if his camera, I can't see if his camera's on. I only
okay.
see the top.
Okay.
James added they've had QR phishing attempts targeting execs at certain customers.
And then
the
email
security solution is now able to ingest pictures and QR codes to read. So if there is a link attached, and scan it from there.
And we'll get, and Chad, if you could hold off on the admin, because that one you're reading below, those I definitely want, because these are ones I wish Chip was on, and I'll bring them up next week. But again, I'll ask Corey his thoughts on this, or any of you guys that are quote unquote more experts at SaaS alerts. But before we go to those, because it's really those two, I'll just give you a preview of down here, you know, adding MFA credentials and downgrading global admin. You would, you know, Corey, I see you chuckling, but really, Corey, you know, interesting how the threat actors are shifting. You would think, you know, if I take, you know, Fortify for a minute, right? And I'm thinking, hey, I want to increase my secure score. Can this in essence backfire without the proper, you know, especially if you're not using SaaS alerts, right? Because you're thinking, well, they're doing the right things. And in talking to this Chris from the IR team, he's like, no, what they're doing is basically locking out your ability to reset the you know, anything in there. Now they can stay in. So talk to us about that, Corey. Are you seeing that as well? And I saw the chuckle. So
well, I've noticed a shift now. Again, luckily, speaking to our numbers, we haven't had a direct hit on this. But it's something that I've read other organizations. I had a similar situation, not related to business, where my mother-in-law, her Facebook account was taken over, and I'm trying to fight this guy, getting her account access back, and I had to do it from her phone. I'm not an iPhone user, I'm an Android guy, right? And I'm trying to figure out her little itty bitty iPhone, and I'm fighting this guy, trying to get her account access back, and we keep resetting the passwords back and forth. And he took a step that I've never seen them actually take, which is the smarter step of adding more email addresses, adding a phone number 2FA. So literally when I'm in there when I finally got in, I'm trying to add 2FA to block him out. He did it right before me because I'm super slow on her iPhone. And I'm like, this is the easy step of locking people out of the account. And it's something I correlated, like, man, this is just super easy and I've seen organizations do this where they say, okay, I'm going to force MFA at next login, but they don't log in.
Right.
So now an adversary, it's easy for them. The adversary compromises those credentials. They get in, they scan the code, boop, MFA's enabled. Good job.
So before we go to the hands raised, Corey, this again, I wish Chip was sitting here to answer this, but like it begs the question: if we're all trying to increase our, sorry to bring it down to layman's terms, right? But if we're trying to increase our secure score, and let's just say for a moment, we're not using a SaaS alert. We're using SaaS alerts on customer A, B, and C, but we're not using it over here. In theory, we might go, well, this is great. People are adopting MFA, right? If we don't have eyes on glass that are seeing potentially some of the behavioral anomalies leading into that. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and this is not going to be a popular opinion. There's certain things that I don't recommend setting and having it Fortify do for you. MFA is one of them. There's certain things that I handhold that I do manually, just like I don't automatically push software to servers. It's just who I am and what I do. I'll automatically have something push software to any of my workstations, laptops, but I never do that on servers. I never have anything boot a server for me. I always do that manually. And so something like MFA, I never say, okay, go ahead and have it go out there for me and enable MFA for everybody. I'm doing that manually so it's controlled. Because I don't want to, again, check that box, force it, and then something happens and now it's a bigger issue because the person can't get in because MFA is jacked up.
Interesting.
So like if you do it, sorry, quick question, Corey, if you do it via conditional access, you go adding one by one into the conditional access policy or?
See, I'm also on a different, I don't use conditional access for that. Now also keep in mind, I'm not an MSP, so I'm not managing multiple customers setting this up, right? So mainly when it comes to this, I'm doing it internally.
Okay.
So something a lot of people, and I think I brought this up in previous conversations, something with conditional access, it makes it easier, but there's a lot of conditional access that I don't believe in, like blocking legacy authentication through conditional access. I believe in doing that before the second method of authentication comes in, right? If I'm going to block legacy authentication, I'm doing it through authentication profile, so it's blocked during the first initial level of authentication, not the secondary after they already used the username and the password.
Correct. So
Really
more
good.
than blocking by a conditional access, disabling. Kind of the legacy, going to the legacy.
Correct. Now, there's use cases behind this. If you're still using heavy, like printers and stuff like that, there's use cases for all of this. But that's something I've tried to educate a lot of MSPs on because we still see those brute forces happening, and everyone's leveraging conditional access. And conditional access is great and it's necessary, but there's certain things that you should be taking before it gets to conditional access, if that makes sense. Those steps should be taken during the first initial authentication method.
Don't use an alarm system, use the deadbolt.
Andy, you got something?
Yeah, something that's coming up for me around what you're doing is something that I think we could enhance our SaaS alerts experience by making our customers aware of these trends and adding data security awareness training with current trends being taught to as it relates to Microsoft 365 or Google or Salesforce. What I'm really getting from here is if we had a feed, Andrew, our SaaS alerts, that said, these are the current trends that are happening, we could educate to it a data security awareness training, and we could work to prevent it with SaaS alerts.
So Andy, you look, everything you're saying is spot on. The intent of an ISAC or an ISAL, right? The intent of what those organizations, and ideally we have, if no shade being thrown here, if there was a really good one in our industry, that is exactly what we would see, that, MSPs would on the margin be engaged in an MSP, ISAC or ISAL. We would be able to communicate.
What is ISAC and ISAL? I don't know those acronyms.
Sorry about that, Andy. It's Information Sharing and Analysis Center or organization. So the biggest one is called the FS or Financial Services ISAC. And there's been attempts to get one going in our industry. And unfortunately they haven't, gotten off the ground the way we need them to. But you're spot on. That is the whole intention, right? So, you see something that's proliferating through healthcare as an example.
Right.
You would then notify all your peers, hey, I'm seeing this, right? And there's different what are called TLPs, traffic light protocols. Some of these
like EPSS, right?
What's that?
EPSS, exploit score. So it's more actively being used or not?
It's about the covertness of the
Okay.
information you're sharing, actually, in this case. So
all this stuff I'm going to learn at Right at Boom, is that right?
Corey's doing a complete course. That's why I asked him if he's come, because I'm going to have him teach a full day course on threat intel. So
Sweet.
he didn't know that, but Yeah, no, so that your point being is, yes, Andy, you're correct. That is exactly what should be happening. That security awareness training is not something that's static, which too often it is, right? We get the same stuff over and over. For security awareness training to be truly effective, we as MSPs have got to be engaged in terms of what is actually the attack du jour at the moment, or what indicators of compromise, or what emails, or what types of threats. Hence, like,
Where I'm going with this, though, is that SaaS alerts would have
the
a
reasons
respond rule as well. In addition to data security awareness training, is that we now create a respond rule where appropriate for said attacks.
no question. But again, that's like, just to finish my thought, why you work with a company like Solutions Granted is because that's what they're doing. That their team is literally ingesting feeds and going, shoot, we got to block this. Oh, we know this is now a known threat. Oh, we know these emails are being used to spoof, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And hence, what it takes a lot of work, Andy. I'm not gonna, sugarcoat anything to keep that, type of pace, if you will, with threat intel. It's no fair, Corey. I mean, it takes a lot of capability, automation, people, and process to keep up with that kind of threat feeds and et cetera.
Yeah, it's a never-ending journey.
Yeah. So, but the spirit is dead on, Andy. You're dead on where it should be, what we should be doing.
So Solutions Granted is my SOC, but I use SaaS alerts independent of them. And I was looking to apply this to SaaS alerts as a concept overall, is that we could have respond rules create so this, or maybe we have that community start to create these based on the current threats that are being seen out there, is where also where
No, I get it, but that would be, you now have to pull in, like, sorry, and all last thing I'll say,
That's
because I
right.
don't want to digress to the audience too much, but that you literally have to have Chip here saying, yeah, we're gonna take another just threat data to then be adding into our SOAR capability. I don't know that that's what they want to do, and I'm in no position to speak for Chip and team to go, yeah, they're going to do that. That's a very tall order. It's not for the faint of heart to do it. It's a great idea, but it's a lot of work. Okay, so back on track here. Okay, yeah, and Corey, you were saying so the malicious SharePoint links, all the legitimate stuff you're still seeing on a recurring basis, and I think we all are. OneNote really came on strong this year. There were some really heavy promotions of that. This one, living off the land. This one seems to be increasing. And Corey, one of the things that this gentleman told me was, as people move more and more to Microsoft, it's actually giving threat actors an advantage to go, what does Microsoft deem, if most people are moving to a Microsoft stack, what does Microsoft deem as, a legitimate application? Does that make sense to you? So they're using these tools more and more that would not seem nefarious in nature, and then using them in their exploitation, in their exfiltration, etc.
Yeah, all the time. And that's the benefit of those threat feeds that we were talking about. And that's some of the most common questions that I get around the SOC as well, as well, how do you keep up with current day events? And there's no super easy answer. It's internal and external threat intelligence and threat feeds, right? Obviously, we see things that are hitting MSPs, that are targeting MSPs. We see internal trends. We learn about trends that necessarily, like some of the things we talked to that I said I haven't seen, educating on those feeds. So, okay, what can we do to account for some of these things? And that's the tough part overall. And that's even the tough part with managing SaaS alerts on your own that I'm sure everybody has faced is, yes, they can provide you all the data in the world, but what are you going to do with that data? How are you going to correlate that information to identify it? And that's the hardest part, is correlating the data to account for that. Luckily, like Supermailer, I'm familiar with that. We've seen that it's what I call the dual use, used for good, used for bad. And it's typically when you start seeing the adversaries using it as part of the tool set, from a alerting standpoint, you have to investigate it more, which can produce more false positives, but you have to have your customer understand that you're doing your due diligence because it's live threats that are out there.
Yeah, really good point. This was an interesting one, the anti-forensic moves. Again, this is a reason, like, again, if not everybody's on SaaS alerts, to talk about stories of, hey, my customers over here are on it. So, and again, the need to make sure that now that E3 is doing logging, you have to, I forget exactly how, but remember the post-storm event Microsoft set as a September, they will provide logs in E3 and above licenses. But what they're doing now is, going back, the threat actor, once they go through and do their damage, is literally going back and wiping out things that the forensic team would look for that would identify actually what they did and how they did it. So that is, again, that's a good story to be able to go tell your customer that if we're not doing this, here's what, why we've got both hands behind our back now.
I mean, that's similar to deletion of the Windows event logs as an example. That they've been doing for years. And, I've always tried to steer MSPs themselves away from, I always get the question, do we need to set up our own SIM and manage our own SIM internally? It's a big thing, a big journey to bite off. If they can handle it, awesome. If you have the staff, the capabilities to do it, awesome. But I mean, that's the benefit, though, of exporting that type of information to a repository that the adversaries can't touch, because they're going to try to delete as many breadcrumbs as possible to remain undetected.
Yeah, very, very, very true. Let's jump to these. Like we talked about, this is the interesting ones here that, you would think that, hey, maybe my customer put in a PAM solution and they're downgrading admin. Corey, thoughts on this one? You think, hey, good stuff's happening. Admin credentials are getting taken away. What's the threat actor's rationale there for actually decreasing? Is it that they went in and did their stuff and now that most bringing down credential level, is it not going to set off a trigger? Is that part of the thought process?
I haven't heard of them doing their own account that they've compromised and are using downgrading. I haven't heard of that. Initially, I can't think of a huge benefit, because even downgrading can trigger an event that someone would be like, oh, why did Corey's account get downgraded to a regular user or whatever, right? Whatever they're doing in regards to that.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting. I have to dig into that one more with them.
Yeah.
The last one, he said, this one was scary as hell, using MS Teams to do different verifications. Have you seen use of that, Corey?
And that's been going on for a while. I mean, no, not just Teams, right? But this is what's the big company that MSPs are using to validate that you are who you are when taking a support ticket? CP Cyber? Is that what it is?
CyberQP.
CyberQP. That's what it is. Sorry. CyberQP, right? I mean, that's having that ability to validate who you are through you are. I mean, again, it comes to where are everybody so desensitized? So if they're leveraging Teams to communicate, which a lot of organizations are, you're desensitized, right? Your defensive come down because obviously they're in your teams, they're part of your organization. What can go wrong here? So I mean, it's a valid tactic but having a Teams meeting, that's interesting. That's very bold. Very bold.
They are bold, that's for sure. All right. Any comments before I go into the last segment here and kind of into the something I'm going to leave you guys with, but we'll walk through it together a little bit as the tabletop. But any questions, comments? There's a few chat comments. Amy, did I miss any? Oh, there it is, CyberQP. And
I've got one.
yeah, please.
What we've seen on the QR front is essentially trying to get around like link protection and things that we've done on endpoints, but traditionally we've had it managed handheld devices, phones. We've used, the built-in kind of data protections for Microsoft to take care of some of those things, but the device itself is not necessarily locked down or monitored in the same level of scrutiny. So what we'll see is the phone is the vector for the compromise itself, where we've seen support connections doing like screen shares to a person's phone.
Hmm.
And to facilitate getting access to those MFA codes on the phone without compromising the account directly, or adding a new authenticator token the first time. They'll authenticate with the user's token directly from another location using their code in real time, and then they'll start moving laterally. We've also seen it where they're trying to compromise the phone directly to extract the backup or pull the MFA tokens off the device itself and try to essentially kind of virtualize the device and continue using those tokens, and like being preventative in the sense that we've also seen them try to, kind of lock us out, like what you're talking about, these global admins, just to give them some delay time to allow them to move quickly and delete their logs. And having to try to track them can be very hard to do so in real time, because they're, as you were pointing out, Cody, it's, the interfaces on the phones are quite a bit visually different. And so like from our support team's perspective, it's hard for them to articulate what it looks like on the phone over the phone with an end user, because they don't, there's different versions of the iPhone, there's different apps, there's different Android phones. And so the interface and the communication around that has been problematic.
Really interesting. Really interesting.
That's where smishing comes in. That's what, if you ever talk to me, I said I wouldn't bother with phishing. I would just go straight smishing, and that's where my honeypot is on people's phones. All those MFA tokens, direct access to your credit card companies, your bank, everything's on your phone. It goes back to that desensitized feeling of, oh, it's my phone, it's safe, we're good. Thank you Android, thank you iPhone.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, again,
May I ask a question about this as it relates to both Andrew and Corey? And that is, for other countries that are farther along in this process, I'm thinking of China and parts of Europe around this with the smishing piece. What can we learn from their markets that we could help protect our market, which is not so advanced or so matured in that particular area? I'm believing electronic payments with phones is everywhere in China. Very few people have credit cards. They're just using their phones as an example. Or in Europe, they're farther along in the adoption of some of these trends than we are here. What can we learn from those markets that might help us? And maybe I'm off base. I'm thinking that they have adopted more rapidly than we have in the United States.
I'm personally not qualified to answer that, but what about you, Corey?
I think a lot of it. I'm trying to think of a politically correct way to say this. I'll just say I don't know at the moment. No, I mean a lot of these countries, their government heavily modifies what they can and can't do at the government level.
That's true.
I don't know how that will fly over here, like in the United States or even Canada, right? I think there's a lot of, especially when it comes to China, like the amount of dictatorship around. You can't access these particular things on the internet from a whole country level, right? Which, can that provide you an extra level of security? Yes. Will that fly over here for many people? Not at all.
Yeah, really good point, Corey.
I think a lot of it's attributed to that. I don't have besides that, a good answer for you.
Well, good questions, and thanks for that, Corey. All right, so I brought you guys a tabletop. I'm not going to read it from here. I'm going to bring it up in ideally this. Yeah. So I'll hand this out to everybody, but I wanted to walk through a little bit of it with you. And first, from the perspective of, what would it look like if you did this within your own organization, right? Before you think about, hey, what if I did this with a customer? What would happen in your own organization? So, I'm not going to read it word for word, but basically I give you guys an entire scenario. I'll show you the whole thing and then I'll come back, right? Right. So it's the scenario. You're going to walk through what things are in place, what things aren't. There's facilitator questions, and it continues on. You have these this area where you can literally fill things out. So, if you come back to the scenario where, you're sitting down with your own team, right, and saying, okay, it's, 2024, what's happening? Well, maybe we have a security awareness training program going on in our organization. Hopefully you do. Hopefully you're doing those types of things and phishing simulation, etc. But during that time, some of the employees report suspected, right? Because you could be doing, actual testing, and real stuff more than likely is going on at the same time, right? And you have 3 different types of versions of emails that are being pushed out, legitimate phishes that include things like, past dues. A good one this time of year, Corey, I don't know if you've seen, but this time of year is an excellent one to do around healthcare renewal. I mean, everybody is doing their renewals right now. So, I mean, that would certainly be one that you could use as a target. Certainly getting things like requesting password resets, and certainly getting things about changing wiring instructions. So the question is, in your own organization, if something like this came up, as we walk through this, you don't have to sit here and say, hey, I got all this in place, or I don't, but take a look at some of these. Like, how would you fare as we walk across this? And if someone says, hey, yeah, I think I clicked on this, or I think I got this email, or I think this is going on. Do you have existing policies in place to handle this? And as you ask this, also maybe think about your customers. Think about your top customers, right? 80-20 rule, where, we want to be looking at the companies that are the most impactful to our bottom line, because we probably can't do this for every customer. But if this happened and we found this out, what actions would we take? Do we have the processes in place? Do we have processes to escalate? And what and who would be involved is in our own company, right? Do we know exactly how we would escalate? What teams would handle it? How do we keep informed? Is there, a separate system? Are we going to keep this in our PSA? That may not be good from God forbid it does become something that could be discoverable, where everybody in the company has access to that data, that ticket. So let me just pause there. What are your thoughts on this? Is this helpful to kind of go through and think about these within your own organization? Well, that's not good.
I think everybody's speaking at once here.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to run my mouth, so I'll
Please,
speak up, and
Corey.
maybe that'll cause other people to talk. Situation like this, I mean, we do our own internal exercises as well. I mean, MSPs, you have keys to a lot of kingdoms. As an MSSP, providing SOC services and all that, we have a whole lot of keys in our key to a whole lot of kingdoms, right? So we have to, hold ourselves at a much higher standard, even than what we ask MSPs to hold themselves at, right? Because it all comes down to liabilities. And so we also do our own tests, especially having a SOC to see, okay, is my SOC on point and are they awake? So,
Right.
There'll be
Right.
times where I'll create a fake MSP in our system. I'll trigger off in a critical event just to see how my SOC reacts to it, take it from there. We'll
Wow.
test internal situations, right? If one of our internal machines appears to have been hit, how is the SOC responding? Because ultimately they're going to be the ones, especially at night, responding to these things, right? And time is of the essence when something like this happens. So I think providing these types of exercises, and it's tough. It's tough taking time away, right, or from your normal day-to-day mayhem, as I'll call it. But it's one of those necessary evils just to make sure you have everything in place.
I really appreciate you filling that in, Corey, because I think there's a tendency of confirmation bias. Fair or not, Corey, is that we're like, oh, we know what we're doing until it happens.
Yeah.
And then there's a very different reality, isn't there? And
Hey, I mean, your
Good.
exercise last year might have worked just fine, but that's last year, and now this year you might have new employees, right? Your staff might have changed, your stack might have changed, everything. You might have MSPs changed vendors in general, right? And so while you might have done this test last year, things are typically different the following year. So just constantly keeping up with this and running these tests. And I run across it all the time when we report things to MSPs, they don't have an incident response plan.
Right.
Or, not getting any type of response off an alert that we sent, and then we contact them and they're like, oh, I haven't seen your email. Oh, I can't. Oh, we didn't know what to do with this alert, so we just moved all your stuff to the junk folder. What? And so that's internal processes that owners of MSPs need to validate. Does your team even know what to do when a situation happens, whether it's internally or an external vendor contacting the organization to the help desk, because most organizations have emails come into the help desk and you hope your guys are doing the right thing and processing these tickets right. Have you tested this out?
Corey, and I'm going to maybe tell me if this is an analogy worth saying or not, with the Marine, knowing you're a Marine, and thank you for your service. Like, everything I've read is, especially with special ops, like 90% of their stuff is testing, and retesting and training, and not the real thing. Obviously they are doing, and you've done the real thing, but really that's what you're getting at is like, we spend so much time, I think, as MSPs doing. We got tickets, we got service, we got some, we're doing, and we're probably not spending a lot of time on the training aspect.
Yeah, or it's blind training. Yes, we use an internal training system of it's going to send out phishing emails. Here is your dedicated training video, but what are you doing past that automated system?
Yeah.
Because employees will always be employees, right? And so, some care, some don't. Some are coming in to work the 9 to 5. Some have that dedication. So you have to be able to do, I'm always a fan of any training, repetition, right? Instill it, let it become muscle memory. And then again, you got to keep with that repetition.
Right. By the way, Andy, this is for if he's still with us, I don't know if he is, but I literally what you were about is in here. So anyway, the scenario continues and goes into a different facet of the exercise, and goes through that scenario all over of, would you be ready to, do you have a policy? Would you know how to handle it? Who would handle it? How would you escalate it? So I think it'd be a really interesting exercise for you guys to go through. Again, I know the rhetoric is we don't have time. Do it as a lunch and learn. Do it after hours, as bring the team in, pizza and beer, whatever. But see how, and it's a great culture building exercise, right? And don't sit there, it says up front, like, be harsh and like, we stunk. But at the end, there's after action plan, right? What things are we going to change based on what we saw as we went through this, right? Hopefully there's a lot of good things, but hopefully there's also things where you're like, gosh, we had no idea we were blind, we had no idea what we would do there. Right. So good stuff, Amy. How's that for a wrap?
I think that's great. So Ryan was asking if you would call tabletop training or testing, that they see it as testing. And then the training comes afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, Ryan, I'm certainly not going to hang my, like, what the terminology is, whatever, you guys are.
The reason why I bring it up is that, as an MSP industry, we've been trying to, get our customers be more and more engaged in training, like security awareness training, things like that. So they're budgetarily slowly becoming more and more comfortable with this bucket of time and bucket of products called training when it comes to this situation. We've not had a lot of testing. It's more like pen testing. So it's like I'm trying to train them on, like, it's a different budget to put together, and it may need to be just as important as your training budget, but this is a testing budget, and I would put pen testing in that testing budget as well. And so trying to kind of build up the budgetary piece for our clients so that they have the capabilities to allow us to do this testing, because they keep kind of putting it in the training category, and they already have this budget for security awareness training that they're having a hard time understanding what the tabletop exercise adds to that piece, because they see it as more as training rather than testing. It's kind of words play, but it's just trying to get through the objections of how to get the practice to take off.
Yeah, really good stuff. And by the way, it can honestly sometimes just start with like a question, right, Ryan? Like, hey, I got a question for you. Let's say this happened, and we weren't, we're not your MSP. What would you guys do? Like, walk me through what you got. How would you guys handle this? Would you know what to do?
Yeah, and most of our clients don't know how to answer that question, and they just kind of pause and be like, "So isn't that we hire you guys for?" This is normally the answer.
And you're hoping they say, and that's exactly it, right? I'm so glad you said that, because that's you're bringing up a really good point, is that we have to educate our clients that security isn't something that's abdicated to the MSP and there's no responsibility, right? This is very much a shared responsibility. But because I'll close with this, our legacy as MSPs, right, for 20 years has been, right, prior to us, the last 6 years, really getting involved in cyber deeply. It was always, hey, you pay us one price and we do it all for you. So we've trained, right? We have trained our customers that we handle everything. So we're kind of having to go back now and say, IT, the block and tackling and plumbing of IT, sure, we handle that for you. Security is a different domain, but they see it as one.
One of the things that I've been trying to do is on the cyber defense matrix, like, we help with the technology, like we'll resell you the technology, we'll implement the technology, and we also have most of the people. So like we use most of the labor for doing those pieces and implementations and the response aspect, but the policies and procedures piece is where you have to collaborate with us. And where it seems to overlay the most is the training and the testing piece. So trying to keep them as accountable to that side of the equation so far has been, we've had better traction in these kinds of conversations at the end of last year coming into this year, that I'm hoping we're going to get more traction to do these types of activities.
Awesome. All right, we'll wrap it there. Great way to close it.
Andrew, we have at least 3 people who have requested a copy of the doc. Do you have a link, or
can I send it to you, Amy?
So I've got Joshua, Sean, and Forrest, who look like all 3 of them would like a copy. I looks like Eric and hold on, keep them coming.
Preferably not a link to a SharePoint site,
Eric,
please.
If it's Eric from Zephyr, I'm not sure.
Just make sure it's an anonymous
link. We'll put it up as a link, Corey.
Yeah, preferably not a link to a SharePoint site, please.
Yeah, just fish test us right now.
Or
Let's do it.
I'll send you guys a PDF. So, okay, there's more people coming. I think I can download a copy of the chat afterwards. And
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you and we can send it to everybody.
Were you throwing shade, Andrew?
I was gonna say if it's Eric V, no problem. Eric Z, nah, we won't give it.
All right, awesome. We'll get this out. If you don't see it in your inbox by end of day, shoot me over an email, Amy at SaaS Alerts, and I'll make sure you get it.
Awesome. I'll send it over to you right now, Amy. Thanks, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.